On Boxing Day 1967, the Beatles' film Magical Mystery Tour was premiered on primetime BBC One. But unlike its accompanying soundtrack, it was met with confusion and disappointment. In America, where the film never even made it onto the TV screens, the British soundtrack EPs were transformed into a best-selling full-length album. I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and welcome to the story of the Magical Mystery Tour. Despite featuring some of their finest songs, the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour film is generally regarded as the first failure of the Beatles' career. Stupid, pretentious rubbish, which was no doubt intended to be very clever. A load of rubbish. We could have made better home movies ourselves. Those were just a few of the overwhelmingly negative comments levelled at the film by viewers who'd been perplexed by its lack of storyline or theme and found it virtually incomprehensible. But why, after all the success they'd enjoyed with their previous films, A Hard Day's Night and Help, was Magical Mystery Tour such a flop? Released on June 1st, 1967, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band became one of the best-selling albums of their career. It wasn't the best-selling album of the decade. That award went to the soundtrack for The Sound of Music. But it was, for many, Paul McCartney included, the peak of the Beatles' career. The following month, their next single, All You Need Is Love, topped the charts around the world and lifted the group's mood and optimism to an all-time high. In one of his final interviews in June 1967, Beatles manager Brian Epstein was asked about what was in store for the Beatles in the near future. What they are doing now is working towards a TV program for worldwide distribution, and they also want to make a film, but they want complete freedom to do it their way. They want to create all of it, with a little help from their friends. They feel they can manage the sound, so why not the visual side as well? We all know about visual things, and there are good people at NEMS capable of helping us with this. But those plans were thrown into disarray on August the 27th, when Epstein died of an accidental overdose at the age of just 32. It was Paul McCartney who'd originally come up with the idea for the Magical Mystery Tour in April 1967, whilst on a surprise visit to see his girlfriend, Jane Asher, who was touring with a Bristol Old Vic in America. Now, Paul owned and enjoyed using his 16mm movie camera, and it was while he was on a walk with Jane in Boulder Park, Colorado, that he decided that the Beatles were perfectly capable of making their own film. He drew inspiration for Magical Mystery Tour from a man named Ken Casey, who, in 1964, along with a group of men and women calling themselves the Merry Band of Pranksters, had embarked on a drug-fueled trip from the West Coast to New York City in a school bus covered in Day-Glo paint. And it was this, coupled with his own fond memories of travelling on buses and coach trips from Liverpool to see the Blackpool Lights, that formed the basic theme for the film. On the plane back to England, Paul and his friend Beatle roadie Mal Evans came up with a kind of pie chart plan for the film, which laid out all its different sequences. Now, the Beatles had up to that point been successful in everything they'd turned their hand to, and saw no reason why this project should be any different, so they agreed to go ahead. Recording sessions for the songs for Magical Mystery Tour began in August 1967. One of those early sessions, for the song Your Mother Should Know, took place at Chapel Recording Studios on August the 23rd, which would end up being the final one Brian Epstein would attend. On September the 5th, 9 days after Epstein's death, the Beatles met up at Paul's house for a crisis meeting, and during that meeting it was decided that they should press on with the Magical Mystery Tour project. Although much has changed since 1967, watching domestic television programs from abroad is still difficult and often impossible. The satellite dish on top of my house here in Austria used to pick up loads of UK channels, but these days, thanks to changes in satellite positioning and copyright legislation, nearly all have disappeared. But now, thanks to this video sponsor NordVPN, I can enjoy watching not just British TV like the amazing BBC iPlayer, but channels from over 100 other countries around the world. A VPN, or Virtual Private Network from NordVPN, not only lets you consume content from other countries, it also helps to keep you safe online by encrypting your internet connection and hiding your location, thus ensuring your privacy and anonymity. As our lives become more and more reliant on our digital devices and the internet, the more the risk grows from malware, phishing scams, web tracking, and a host of other cyber-related dangers. NordVPN's threat protection uses AI-powered phishing detection tools and robust databases to defend your device against such attacks, and stops you from accidentally entering dangerous websites. It even recognizes websites that are likely to scam or trick you. Threat protection is integrated into NordVPN desktop apps, but doesn't require a VPN connection to work, and it's available for all browser extensions on both Windows and Mac. Protect yourself today with an exclusive NordVPN deal, which includes 4 months extra, by clicking on the link in the description. It's risk-free and comes with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. On September the 11th, the Beatles then began 2 weeks of filming. Paul, along with 33 passengers or characters, such as Mr. Bloodvessel, played by Ivor Cutler, the Rubber Man, played by Nat Jackley, Jolly Jimmy, played by Derek Royal, and Ringo's aunt, played by Jessie Robbins, left Allsop Place near Baker Street for 5 days location filming in the West Country. The bus picked up John, George and Ringo at Virginia Water, after which they continued the 183 miles to Teignmouth in Devon, where they all spent the night. The next day, they headed off for Dartmoor, but the bus became stuck on a narrow bridge and had to turn back. After 3 further brief stops, the bus arrived at the 3-star Atlantic Hotel in the Cornish resort of Newquay, where they stayed for 3 nights. They travelled back to London on September the 15th, randomly stopping at a tiny fish and chip shop in Taunton along the way. This spontaneous lunch stop was filmed but cut out of the final film. On September the 18th, they shot the strip-tease sequence at the Raymond Review Bar in London. It was then back on the bus for 5 more days shooting at West Malling Air Station in Maidstone, Kent, which resulted in some of the most memorable scenes in the film. West Malling had been used as an airbase in the Second World War and still retained its huge concrete blast walls, which were featured prominently in the performance of I Am the Walrus. The interior sequences, such as Aunt Jess's Dream, which featured John's idea of shoveling spaghetti onto the table, were shot in an enormous empty hangar on the site, as was George's Blue Jay Way sequence. The Your Mother Should Know finale was filmed on the final day of shooting, were accompanied by 160 of Peggy Spencer's dancers and 24 cadets of the West Malling-based Royal Women's Air Force. The Beatles descended a glittery staircase dressed in all-white suits. The final scene to be shot was actually the first one which appeared in the film, where Ringo buys tickets for the tour from John. This was filmed in a newsagent's in West Malling on Friday, September the 22nd. Work on editing the film began on September the 25th in London. Originally, they planned just 1 week to complete it, but it became a tedious affair, with John and Paul at odds with each other over the process. In the end, it took 11 weeks to edit down 10 hours of film into 52 minutes, with many scenes ending up on the cutting room floor. The next big decision was how to present the music to the public, and by mid-November, speculation was rife amongst fans about how and when the Beatles would release the songs from Magical Mystery Tour. The problem that the Beatles and their record company EMI had was that there were too many songs for a standard single EP, but not enough for an album. The EP, or extended play, had enjoyed a strong following with the record-buying public since the late 1950s. However, by the mid-60s, record buyers were turning increasingly to long-playing albums, and the EP faded away. But the Beatles decided to give the format a fitting epitaph and proposed to release the music as a special double EP set, which would be issued in mono and stereo. In addition, there would be a 32-page booklet packed with colour and black and white photos, with a comic strip style story illustrated by Beatles book illustrator Bob Gibson. Priced at 19 shillings and sixpence, sixpence short of that all-important £1 price tag, the release date was set for December the 1st. However, due to difficulties with the production of the booklet, together with a rail strike, the release date was put back 1 week to Friday the 8th of December, when 750,000 copies were supplied to record shops all around the UK. Over in the States, the Beatles' American record company Capitol balked at the idea of releasing a double EP set. EPs as a format had never taken off stateside, so Capitol came up with a better plan. Capitol's genius idea was to expand the set into a full-blown album. The proposed album would contain not only the 6 songs from the Parlophone EPs, but also the new single Hello Goodbye, and both sides of their previous 2 singles, Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, and All You Need Is Love and Baby You're a Rich Man, none of which had appeared on an album to date. However, due to contractual issues, the Magical Mystery Tour album wasn't released on vinyl in the UK until November 1976, despite it having been available on cassette and 8-track cartridge since 1973. The EP set entered the UK chart on the 19th of December at number 20, after which it peaked at number 2 for 3 weeks, beginning on the 2nd of January 1968. Now, one of the most essential accessories to any British Christmas in the 60s, 70s and 80s was the Christmas edition of the Radio Times. We'd usually get it the day it came out, and would then go through it and carefully mark everything we wanted to see over the festive period. This is a rather worn but original copy of the Radio Times from Christmas 1967, and it covers just 1 week on BBC television and radio, from the 23rd to the 29th of December. Let's have a look what's on. Christmas Day was the jewel in the crown as far as TV was concerned, and on that day in 1967 you could watch Sooty, Z-Cars, Leslie Crowther, Top of the Pops, and Billy Smart's Circus. Tony Blackburn was opening up the day on Radio 1, where you could also find Jimmy Young, Kenny Everett, and Ed Stewart. But it's Boxing Day that we're really interested in, as that was when the Magical Mystery Tour film was to be shown. Now, the BBC had launched its colour television service on the 1st of July 1967 with the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. But that, along with all the other colour programmes, was shown only on BBC Two. BBC One and ITV wouldn't go full colour until the 15th of November 1969. Magical Mystery Tour was broadcast between Petula Clark and the News at 8:35 p.m. on Boxing Day 1967 on BBC One, in black and white. Now, anyone who's seen this film knows that its colourful look is one of its strengths, so it must have seemed very dull indeed viewed in black and white, and was, as one person described, positively the worst programme I can remember seeing on any TV channel. Although it was repeated 10 days later on the 5th of January on BBC Two, in colour, the damage had been done. Both fans, critics and the general public were confused and disappointed by the film. And as a direct consequence of all this negative press, American TV network ABC cancelled their planned showing of the film. In fact, its first theatrical showing in the US wouldn't happen until May the 19th, 1968. But instead of being shown to millions on TV, it was instead seen by just 770 people at a theatre in Los Angeles. It wasn't broadcast again in the UK until the 21st of December 1979, which is when I first saw it, along with all of the Beatles films which were being shown that Christmas. In 2012, Apple gave it the deluxe reissue treatment in the form of this box set, which contained not only the DVD and Blu-ray of the film, but a reproduction of the double vinyl EP too. If you want to hear this album at its best on vinyl, I highly recommend this German pressing, which was produced from 1973 to 1986. It, unlike its original American counterpart, uses true stereo versions of all its tracks, and in pristine quality too. The UK edition from 1976 bizarrely uses a copy of the US tape, which includes fake stereo versions of Penny Lane, Baby You're a Rich Man, and All You Need Is Love. A few years ago, we were lucky enough to find this box of new old stock original stereo EPs from a shop in Sweden where they'd been exported for sale. And it was, for me, one of the finds of my life. Thankfully, the version you can buy today, either on CD, vinyl or streaming, is in pristine true stereo. But for me, nothing beats the sound of this German vinyl. For many, Magical Mystery Tour dealt the Beatles a blow from which they never really recovered. The film is without doubt a product of its time, and should be remembered for giving us unique performances of some of their best songs, and, thanks to Capitol, one of their best and most memorable albums in their catalogue.